Karen, Happy New Year.
Hey, Happy New Year to you too.
Okay, so we are so excited to have you on this series, tackling one of the hardest and most awesome topics there is, marriage. So tell us, first of all, how long have you been married?
32 years.
Wow. And where did you meet your husband?
We met in the college dining commons at our little Christian college we went to in Michigan.
So you've got a few years of experience on this.
A couple. We were in kindergarten when we got, I just have to clarify that we were in kindergarten when we got married because 32 makes me sound so old. We were babes.
Well, and you've raised kids together. You're empty nesters now, right?
Just about. We have our youngest who's 20 who rents from us. They can live here in the teen years and then they pay rent. So that gets them moving out kind of fast, but he's still here paying rent. But other than that, we are empty nesters. So sort of empty nesters, I'll say.
And you just wrote a book called Keep Showing Up: How to Stay Crazy in Love When Your Love Drives You Crazy. Is this the first marriage book you've ever written?
It is. I've touched on marriage a little bit in my book, Let It Go, on being a control freak, on how not to be a control freak. And I touched on it a little bit in my book, Keep It Shut, about how we use our words in marriage, but I've never written an entire book on it. This is the first one.
So, what motivated you at this stage, at this 32 years in, what motivated you to write this now?
I think kind of two things, both just looking at my own marriage and seeing how, I don't know, the things that we deal with are the same things we dealt with when we were newlyweds. It's like you hit up against the same issues over and over and over again. My husband and I always tease and say, oh, here it comes. We're going over to the file cabinet. We're pulling out file 13. We've already been down this road before, but we're pulling it out again, and just seeing how it gets better. Sometimes it doesn't go away, but God continues to meet you as you just keep being faithful and keep showing up. So both in our own marriage and then also looking at just the landscape of the marriages that we have known since we have been married, there are so many that did not last. And I don't want to say that in a condemning way at all, because there are certainly serious issues in marriage sometimes that are biblical grounds for divorce or situations of abuse, whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse. There are some really serious issues in marriage, and I'm not talking about that at all. But just the marriages we've seen that over the years just decided to throw in the towel for no real apparent reason, just this vague, oh, I was young, I really didn't know what I was doing, or, oh, he just doesn't make me happy anymore. And in fact, my husband and I, probably about, I was trying to remember exactly how many years, but I'm going to say about 15 years ago, we led a life group of 8 couples, and we were studying marriage, and 6 of those couples are no longer together today.
Oh my gosh, that's a
Now,
lot.
yeah, and there were some that had serious issues, had complete, understandable ends to those marriages. So I don't want to be condemning in any way, but for some of them, it was just this, he doesn't make me happy, or she doesn't make me happy. And I don't feel like there's a lot of encouragement out there to keep showing up, quit, never stop starting over is how I like to say it, because marriage is hard. It's not a walk in the park. And so I think just seeing that and wishing I could sit down with people and just say, look, if marriage is to make you happy, then I should have been divorced 17 times over. There's been like 5 times this week my husband did not make me happy, but we have a wrong view of what marriage is. And so when it's not meeting up to our wrong expectations, it's so easy to just quit.
Yeah, I think this book sounds like a great book for any woman who really is in a regular marriage, who feels like, I am married to somebody who's not perfect because he's human, and I'm not perfect because I'm also human. And I can certainly relate to those same conflicts keep coming up and up and up. So how do I, as I head into the new year, start fresh in ways that aren't revolutionary, but are ways that I can control? So let's talk about this idea of keep showing up. I really appreciate, Karen, that you said you're not talking about relationships where there's abuse involved, that we're not asking women to keep showing up into an abusive situation over and over. But for a woman who is maybe frustrated with her husband because he's either doing things or not doing things over and over that are different than the way she would like them done, what are some steps you suggest to a woman in that situation?
Well, I think often the things that frustrate us the most about our spouse, if we really take a step back and look at them, are actually things that first attracted us to them in the first place. Because what happens is these strengths get carried to an extreme, and then now they're a weakness, and we don't see it when we're dating. Let me give you an example. So my husband is very laid back, very agreeable, go with the flow, whatever comes, what do you want to do? He has no opinion. He just is there for the ride and is just a really laid back guy. I loved that when we were dating. If it came to be Friday night and we would try to decide what restaurant to go to or movie to see, he had no opinion. I don't care, whatever you want to do. And I loved that setup. But about 3 months into our marriage, it really began to bother me that he didn't make decisions. It became, in my mind, passivity. And on the flip side, if you would ask my husband what first attracted him to me, he would say the way she could talk. She just could work a room, make everybody feel included, bring the shy ones out of their shell. She could talk to anybody. But then about 3 days into our honeymoon, he wondered when I was ever going to shut up, In fact, he teases that should I go before he does, he's already decided what he's going to put on my tombstone. Guess what it is?
What?
A simple period. Just a period. She's finally done talking, So what happens is I interpreted his laid back personality and his a little bit of a hesitation to make decisions as passivity. Mm-hmm. And then my talking got out of control, and I can talk really fast when we're having a fight, and I can back him into a corner. And now that looks like I'm being aggressive. And so I always joke that we have a passive aggressive marriage because he's passive, I'm aggressive. But if we can step back and think, is this one of my spouse's strengths that's carried to an extreme and it's a weakness? It makes it a little easier to take, because instead of looking at it, well, I don't even like to use the word weakness. My husband, I call them non-strengths. Instead of looking at it as one of their non-strengths, we can look at it as it's just something that's gotten a little out of control here, and we can dial it back a little bit. That helps me when something's bothering me about my husband. And then the other thing that really has helped me, I have these little 1-sentence sermons I sometimes preach to myself. And one of them is, okay, your husband is your husband. He is not your God. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that by, you worship him like he's God, but you expect him to be God and meet all your needs and bring you joy and know what you're thinking and all of that. He's not my God, he's my husband. And I need to not misplace that and be looking to my husband for things that only God can really do.
Okay, let's just pause there because I think this is something we all need to absorb. And really, I can really relate to this as far as tension points in our marriage where I've realized I'm expecting too much out of my husband, that I'm expecting more than is humanly possible. So when a woman realizes that, what's your suggestion? What's the next step? Sorry.
I feel like to take those frustrations, whatever you're having, those little bones of contention, things about his personality, things about his actions or inactions, to take all those frustrations, write them all down, and turn them into your prayer list. Don't go nitpicking at them. And I'm preaching to myself on this one. If my husband were here, he'd be like, hey, can you rewind that and listen to it again yourself? I've not arrived in this topic at all. But I feel like to take those frustrations and make them my prayer list to the Lord. Not, oh, Lord, change him, but Father, help me. When this happens, help me to know what to do, how to respond in a Christ-like manner, something different to do, because what we've been doing isn't working. There is so much spiritual growth that happens in marriage when we take our frustrations and our trying times to the Lord. He is faithful to meet us, to change our attitudes, to help us to not react, but to respond in a godly manner. There's so much spiritual growth that happens in marriage, but instead what we do is we just we see these bumps in the road and we think, oh, this isn't working. This is horrible. I have a terrible marriage. No, this is normal. Marriage is hard, and it's not about you. It's about you becoming more like Christ. So if we can reframe these little bumps in the road in a way that is helping us to grow spiritually and to be more patient, more loving, more kind, more understanding, then I think we can learn to embrace these hard times because they are refining us.
Okay, so Karen, I've got a question around this because I do think we're getting to just the everyday life of marriage here. And I think one thing that I know I can find myself doing, and I think I'm not alone in this, is that if we don't like a behavior that our spouse is doing, we'll try and control it by criticizing it. And that can really start breaking down the marriage over time. And so how do we respond in love? Because as my husband and I talk a lot about, when I respond in love to him, he's more motivated to change that and to, help accommodate our marriage through that. When I'm approaching it in that way, as opposed to trying to control it and being critical. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think go ahead.
Well, so my question is really just, how do we flip and pivot so that we are approaching things more in a way that is moving the ball forward in our marriage and being loving and motivating each other toward change for one another as opposed to criticism?
I think, first of all, it's important to look at the behavior and ask yourself, is this a sin issue? Or is this just some kind of idiosyncrasy or some kind of annoying habit that my spouse has? Because it's easy to just harp on them about something that's just, for example, my husband, he loses stuff all the time. Like constantly, where are my glasses? Where are my keys? I'm like, okay, here's the little hook your keys are supposed to be
right.
on.
Yes.
Because like, I'm so, whatever, a creature of habit, that my keys are either on the hook or they're in the ignition, or maybe they're in my purse as I'm walking out to the car, but I don't lose my keys. I just don't do that. That's not how I roll. He loses them all the time. He puts them down various places, including sometimes at the grocery store when he's looking at something that he can't remember what shelf he put them on. He's called me before to come pick them up because his keys were in the grocery store someplace he couldn't find them. But to just ask yourself, okay, is this a matter of sin or is this just how they roll? I have learned my husband just loses things. And I just have to go, okay, his brain just doesn't think in these compartmentalized ways like mine does. It's okay. This is not a sin to lose your keys. It's a frustration. We can try to take steps to make it not happen, but I can't sit there and belittle the poor man because he loses his keys and make him feel like he's just this horrible, terrible sinner because he loses his keys. So I think asking yourself, is this really something that needs addressing because it's actually really tethered to something that's a wrong and sinful act, or is it just that's how they roll? And then to realize that you have just as many flaws and faults and things that drive him crazy as he does. Because I think we look at our own personalities and our own methods for doing things as the right way and our spouses as the wrong way. But it's not wrong, it's just different. And so one of these little one-sentence sermons I preach to myself is, different is different. It is not wrong. It's just different. Everybody does things differently. There are a lot of different ways to get to 4. It can be 2 + 2. It can be 3 + 1. It can be 8 - 4. There are a lot of ways to get to 4, but you still get to 4. And we think everybody has to get to 4 our way when it comes to how things are done around the house, or boy, especially parenting children. And so I feel like if we can realize that different isn't wrong, it's just different. And then finally, that God knew what he was doing when he put us together as a team, and together you and your husband can accomplish things that you could never accomplish alone, because you bring different strengths to the table. You bring different methods to the table. And sometimes I look at the things, especially when it comes to parenting, that my husband thought so polar opposite than me. And I thought he was just cray-cray, out of his mind, thinking, no, we should not confront and my former teenager wouldn't care if I told this, but we should not confront the teenager for the cigarettes that we found in their purse when they're underage. Nicotine is you can't buy it under 18. We should not confront that child and like I wanted to do, take away every privilege for the rest of their life, he said, you know what, I'm going to take her out for dinner. I'm going to talk to her and I'm going to ask her what's going on in her life, what's going on in her heart. And she completely spilled her guts about a friend that she was very concerned about, who was going through some serious things in her life. And she was stressed out about that. She was stressed out about school. She was stressed out about a new job she started. She was stressed out. And he just simply said, well, I think maybe it's good if you start exercising more rather than smoking, because I think that might help you. And she just was like, whoa, and she broke down. And you know what? That approach, it worked, and he cared more about her heart. But see, I was the, you step in and prevent, and he was the, you step back, let them make decisions, let them learn. And together as a team, sometimes we went my way, sometimes we went his way. But I think it's really helpful to remember, together as a team, you are something, you're not alone. And part of that is the things that drives you nuts about your spouse. They can actually be good things.
Okay. So first of all, what I hear you saying is you need to let your spouse parent in the way that he parents and not expect him to parent like you, and that's a good thing. So I just want to camp there for just a minute and say that's a good statement. But I also just want to talk about the idea of humility, because I think with what you're saying, it is impossible to accomplish without humility. Can you speak to that?
Exactly. Especially when it comes to the whole different is wrong. No, it's just different. And we need to have the humility to admit that we don't have all the answers. Our way isn't always the right way. We think it is because it makes the most sense to us. And it's because we've been doing it that way forever and ever. But we have to for sure have humility and go before the Lord and say, okay, I think we should do A. My husband thinks we should do B. Lord, what is right? Is it A? Is it B? Is it something completely different? And to have the humility both with your spouse to admit you don't have all the answers, but the humility before the Lord too, to say, but God, you do have all the answers. We're here, we're listening. Please show us what to do.
It's really good. And I think that could become a constant prayer that we can just keep before ourselves when it comes to our marriage is, God, give me the humility that I need to be in this marriage the way you want me to be in this marriage. And I think that's just a really, really powerful prayer that we can ask God for and ask him to build that in us. So I love that. Okay. So Karen, talk to us maybe about a time in your marriage where you really felt like things were not going well, or you just felt really unsatisfied in your marriage. And then maybe some things that you did to push into that. Because I think when we're feeling discouraged in our marriage, we actually pull out, and the way forward is actually to press in, right? So talk to us about a time where you felt that way and then how you pressed in.
I would probably have to say back in the days when I had a lot of little kids running around my house, my 3 plus all their friends, and my husband was working the night shift. So, well, I guess it was actually technically afternoon shift, but he left like around supper time and he didn't get home till 2 a.m. And I just felt like a single parent. I felt like I was, doing the bedtime, the bath time, the everything time, the homework, all of that by myself. And I just felt very discouraged, not only just because I was exhausted, but I felt like he wasn't pulling his weight around the house. But what I did was I reached out for help to some older women who were mentors to me. And I fought against that because I am very much a people pleaser. I'm a very much, what does this look like to all the folks up there on the sidelines of the soccer field, or all the church ladies or whoever. And I didn't want to admit that I was frustrated and discouraged, and actually, I wouldn't say depressed. I mean, as sad as I have been in my life, I don't know if that's actual depression or not, but for me, it was the saddest I had been. And I reached out, and I was so glad I did, because I had some women who told me that they had been there as well. I had some people that would take, especially my one friend, Mary, she's a real accountability partner for me, and she and I share openly about our marriage. She's kind of my locked box. I don't have to worry about her repeating anything to anybody. And she often would take my husband's side. Like, she would say, okay, this is what I hear you saying, but have you ever thought about this? Maybe this is what he's thinking. In fact, Todd and I always joke, if we make it to 50 years, we're going to send Mary a thank you note for our anniversary. Because
that's awesome.
she helped me to see his side and to realize it wasn't that he wasn't pulling his weight. He couldn't do bath time. Hello, he was at work. He couldn't do the homework. He went to work about the time they were done with school, so to think clearly, sometimes we need an outside person, a trusted locked box. I'm not talking about husband bashing. I'm not talking about, going out on Facebook into your whole social network circle of friends and venting your frustrations about your husband. I'm saying a trusted, godly mentor or two where you can share openly about your feelings, and they will be able to share openly with you to point you to the Lord, and sometimes to take your husband's side so that you can think clearly, because you're only seeing it from your own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I would guess sometimes it helps if that person is a little bit neutral. Like your own mother or your mother-in-law or your own sister may not have the ability to look at things objectively, but to have a friend who loves you both or who doesn't feel invested in your relationship may help.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think too, to have somebody that's a straight shooter, you don't want somebody that'll say, oh, poor baby. You don't need an oh, poor baby. You need somebody that'll know enough scripture to be able to point you to scripture, and also will say the hard things that you need to hear sometimes.
Okay, so Karen, I really want to get to this idea that you talk about in your book about what the real purpose of marriage is. And I think that is really central to how we view pushing through in our own marriage. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think we have gotten such a wrong view of what marriage is when you think about, any of the screens, the movie screen, the television screen, our phone screen. When we look at social media, we get this wrong view that marriage, it completes you. Two halves become whole and they find their soulmate and you live happily ever after. And when your happily ever after isn't so happy after all, you start to think you married the wrong person. But I feel like our problem is that we kind of go in with a setup for failure because we're trying to achieve that heavenly bliss, here on earth, marriage. And that's not what it is at all. Marriage is not two halves becoming whole. It's two whole people becoming more holy and becoming more like Jesus as we trudge through the hard times of marriage, the keep showing up times where we have to forgive and wipe the slate clean and start all over again. And I do feel, when you look at scripture, God likens marriage to Christ and the church, the gospel, the keep showing up ways God is in our life, that he forgives us. He offers us a way to heaven by Jesus dying on the cross for our sins. Marriage is a message, and people are watching you preach. Are they seeing the gospel in your marriage? Are they seeing you forgive and love and accept and wipe the slate clean and remember those sins no more once they've been taken care of? I feel like the world is watching us and they can get a glimpse of the gospel if we have that right view of marriage, rather than trying to be all happily ever after and something that's going to look great on Instagram. It's going to look just like this romantic whatever. No, it's hard work, but we keep loving, we keep forgiving, we keep going on.
That is such a good framework. I think some other people have the narrative that I deserve a certain amount of something from my marriage, that I have rights that I want to fight for, and that they can escalate conflict, which doesn't necessarily show the gospel. Again, we're not talking about an abusive situation, but the humility, I guess it gets back to humility, the humility required to step back and say, I'm going to offer grace, goes against our instinct sometimes to fight for what we think is our right. And that's hard.
It is. And it's such a backwards, upside down way of thinking of things, but it's so true. In marriage, if you really want happiness, you need to not seek happiness. You need to seek to try to make the other person happy. we find our life in losing our life. I mean, the gospel teaches us that when we don't seek to get our needs met, but instead we seek to show the gospel when we interact with our spouse, to be loving and forgiving and to show grace and the benefit of the doubt, when we really make that our aim rather than I'm going to be happy and here's some things you better do to make me happy. It's so backwards, but I can just look back over, 3 decades of being married when I tried so hard to make my husband make me happy. It did not work. But when I just let that go and said, you know what, Jesus, you laid down your very life for me. I can certainly lay down my life in these little things, like not always have to get my way and not always have to correct him and not always have to speak up and, say what I don't agree with. I can just lay down my life, just put him before me in these little ways. And the harmony it brings actually brings me happiness. It's a very, very backwards way, but it's so true. To lose your life or to find your life, you have to lose it sometimes. And not be always seeking to get that happiness, but rather to give joy and happiness to your spouse.
I think just that question, like, am I reflecting the gospel in my marriage? Like just asking that to myself, I think could be a game changer. So thank you for that question, because I think I can start asking that. That's just a quick little thing I can ask. Am I reflecting the gospel in how I'm responding right now? Most of the time, my answer is going to be no, I think, in that moment. But you know what I'm saying? Like, because we're going to be asking ourselves in those moments that are hard, and we're really not doing that. But I also was just thinking about when you were talking, Karen, that we're reflecting the gospel to our kids too through our marriage, and they're seeing it up close and personal. I mean, I think about just the other day, we have teenagers, but I went over and I just, kissed my husband and it was so cute because my 7th grader came up and he just like grabbed us and hugged us so, tightly in that moment and went, "Oh, it's so cute seeing you guys."
Aw.
I mean, it really does give them such a sense of security, but it also that sense of like love, right? Over a long period of time and through hard things, that is reflecting the gospel to our kids who are seeing it the closest. So that's convicting.
Mm-hmm. And it's very true. The kid, that old saying that more is caught than is taught. You can teach your kids all you want about the purpose of marriage and how husbands and wives should behave and all of that, but they're watching, they're catching to see if you're really fleshing out that behavior in your own relationship there in the home.
Right, which is why sometimes I'm not nervous about having a disagreement in front of our kids, because I want them to see us doing it. But when it starts to get unhealthy and maybe the emotions are too high and we're not behaving as we should, that's when I think, oh, we should probably stop. Do you have kind of a rule of thumb as far as disagreeing in order to demonstrate what it means to show grace in front of your kids?
We pretty much were out there in front of our kids when we had conflict. Now, one thing we wouldn't do is we wouldn't discuss an issue with a child in the presence of another child. So if we're having an issue and a disagreement over child 1, we're not going to sit there and do it in front of child 3, But if it's just, I want to say generic kind of issue about, I don't know, you're remodeling the house and you're disagreeing about something, or, something else that's just an everyday part of life and not in regards or with regards to a certain person that's in the home, then our kids did see us disagree and talk it out and sometimes say, you know what, let's just talk about this. Let's just table this for now. We both need to just cool down and go pray. And I think that has been healthy for our kids to see. We'll see how that goes. We have our first one actually getting married, or has just gotten married, I should say, this nice cold winter season, Christmas time wedding. So we're, they're early days. They're early days here, just a couple weeks old. We'll see how that goes. We'll have to ask him, okay, so now you've surely had your first marital spat as newlyweds. Tell us, did you learn anything from us?
Yeah.
Or are you going to do it completely different than we did? That'd be interesting to ask. But, I think maybe that reason that we were like that was because I grew up in a home where I never one time saw my parents disagree. Never a harsh word, never anything. until I was I think it was the second grade. And all of a sudden my dad was packing his bags and he was leaving. They were getting a divorce, and it came out of the blue. And I remember thinking, how can they be getting a divorce? They never fight, but that was that generation where you didn't, you hushed until you were behind closed doors. And I get the motive behind that. I think it was a good motive, but sometimes I think, I wish I'd seen a little bit more of working through conflict, because I didn't know at all how to work through conflict when I got married at all, because I'd never seen it modeled.
It reminds me of something I heard when I was working at MOPS. A researcher from Focus on the Family came and was talking about the trend of young adults getting married later and not getting married as often, right? Marriage in general is going down culturally. And they were trying to get to the root of that. Why is that? And it wasn't that people were afraid of divorce. I think it was more that they were afraid, the researchers found, that they weren't good enough for marriage, because they put marriage on this pedestal. And this researcher said, the best thing we can do for our children is to show them that marriage is hard work, and marriage is sticking it out, which is exactly what you're saying here, is showing up over and over when you have conflict. Because it's not a matter of not having conflict, you will, but it's sticking it out when you do. And that young adults were very aware of their own sin and afraid, I will fail, essentially. I will fail at marriage. And his message was, we need to tell young adults, no, marriage is failing together. You fail towards each other and towards God, and you give each other grace. So I'm just reminded of that as we are talking here.
That's really good. And I think too, another really important thing about conflict in front of our kids that is something that my husband and I didn't always do perfectly, but tried to model, is to let them see a couple, a husband and wife, attacking the problem rather than attacking the person. Because you're going to have problems in marriage, and you're going to have to attack these problems. But if you can do it in a way that is not attacking the other person and belittling them for their decisions or their personality or their method of doing things, but saying, we've got a problem here, we've got to tackle the problem. So that's what we're attacking. We're not attacking each other. Then I think that models for them good, healthy behavior, whether it's in marriage or, in the workplace. There's going to be problems. They need to learn to attack problems and not people.
Well, and I think I'm glad you said that, because I think there is a way to have healthy conflict, and then there's a way that is very destructive and that's contemptuous and brings in that contempt for one another that is destructive, and it's destructive to the people around us too. So maybe we can clarify that we're modeling healthy conflict, not destructive conflict that's causing everyone in the home to feel completely stressed and that's damaging.
Exactly. It's a good way to put it.
Okay. I would like Karen to get to this issue of boredom in marriage because how many of us are just on the treadmill of marriage, and we're doing kids and we're doing life and we're doing work and we're doing, all sorts of things. And we just get into these ruts and routines. So what do you have to say about boredom?
Well, a couple of things. It's funny. I think of ruts and routines, and when my husband and I were first dating, we were in a very routine life. We were in college. We were, going to class, going to chapel, going to whatever activities we were involved in. It was pretty routine and boring over and over again, but there was so much spark and magic, because it was all new and it was all fresh. And over the years, we lose that. Now maybe we're stuck in the boredom of raising kids and going to their activities and working and housework and yard work, and we're in this routine of life, but somehow we've lost the spark. We don't find that magic in the midst of the mundane, is how I like to refer to it. And I think a couple of things can help in this. First of all, I actually thought of this just about 5 years ago. So it was like 25 years in my marriage before I thought of this. When my husband and I were out to breakfast one day, and he ordered, I think it was French toast, and they brought the little basket full of all the jams and jellies, and he was like furiously digging through it and looking for something. And I'm like, what are you looking for? And he said, oh, I thought I saw orange marmalade in here. I wanted to grab some orange marmalade. And I thought, orange marmalade? Since when do you eat orange marmalade? I mean, I make homemade jams every summer, like raspberry, strawberry, and that's what you usually like. And he said, oh, I absolutely love orange marmalade. My mom always had it in the house. And I thought, I have been married to this man for 25 years, and I never knew he liked orange marmalade. And I thought, what other things do I not know about my spouse? Because see, what happens is we do all that get to know you stuff, and then we get the ring and we walk down the aisle, and then we just get busy doing life, and we don't continue to ask our spouses what their favorite things are, what their opinion is about something that's going on. So I think it's good to just try to get to know your spouse all over again. Sometimes just set aside a go out date night, or just to stay in and split a pizza date night or whatever, and just talk about some things. Ask them about their childhood. Ask them who their favorite teacher was in high school and why, and to bring some of that newness into the relationship, because you never can completely know a person when you're here on earth. There's always going to be thoughts they haven't shared with you or memories they haven't shared with you. So getting to know them all over again, I think, is important. And then the second thing I would say, if boredom is setting in, is really consider you and your spouse praying about finding a ministry that's uniquely yours, just you as a team together. And I always point people to look first for people who are in pain, because so often when we get in this boredom and this rut, and we think, we don't have life very good, or our marriage isn't going so well, we're not involved in the lives of people who have it worse off than us. So look for people who are in financial pain, emotional pain, some kind of pain, and together have a ministry where you can help them. For example, my husband and I sometimes will go to a women's shelter where there is a meal being held on Wednesday evenings, and there's a Bible study being done. Well, someone has to serve the meal. Somebody has to watch the kids when the women are in the Bible study. And so my husband and I have done that. Actually, when our kids were younger, we took them along with us too. And we got to see each other serving the Lord, because to me, there's nothing more attractive than seeing my husband follow the Lord and serve the Lord. And so when he's there and playing with those kids during the Bible study time, or, helping to serve the meal, and maybe I'm there teaching the Bible study, or I'm helping to clean up after the meal, we have this sense that together we're doing something that makes a difference, and we're making a difference not only in the kingdom, but in the lives of somebody who has a tougher row to hoe than we do.
I think that's a great point, Karen. And I've heard it said that when you make new experiences together, that actually matters in a relationship, because you're bonding through those new experiences, and then it does help you get out of a rut, because it's not just the same thing. Like, you're not just doing the dinner and a movie again. You're having a new experience, and so your senses are heightened together, and you are building blocks of memory together, and that does something cool in a relationship. So just keeping that in mind. But what you're saying too, I think fits that into that as well, that now you're serving together, so you have a common purpose, and that's really great. And then you're also building these new experiences together in that moment. So I really like that as an avenue for growth.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting, in a way, all over again. It kind of brings back those feelings that you had back when you were first discovering and watching them. It does. I think it's so important not to just do the same old, same old. In fact, we have been thinking about taking ballroom dancing together. We thought that would be fun, something fun. Because both of us thought we really were good. We both got best dancer in high school, and we think we still got it. So we'll see. We'll see if we do.
Okay, that's a really fun award. Side note, super fun award, and uncommon for a male to get that. So that's awesome.
No, he thought he had the moves like John Travolta or something back then. I don't know.
That's great. Okay, well, Karen, tell us a little more about ways you have fought boredom. Like, can you think of some other things you've done in your 32 years that have helped you?
Well, for a lot of years, we just were doing the parent thing, so it was easy to kind of feel like it was boring because you were sitting in the bleachers or the stands or the, auditorium or whatever. But we would try to sneak little things in that were just for us in the midst of doing the kid things, right? So there might be times where our son had a travel baseball tournament in a certain town, and there were going to be lots of games back to back, but we did have pockets of time. So I would go online and I would kind of research, well, what cool restaurants are around there? Or is there, we don't have Trader Joe's here in mid-Michigan. I love Trader Joe's. I remember one time there was a baseball tournament in a town where there was a Trader Joe's. So I introduced my husband to Trader Joe's. I had been to them on some of my travels and speaking, but he'd never been there. Now that sounds like a silly little thing, but it was just kind of a little fun sidetrack trip for us in the midst of doing all the kid things. Just thinking of little, even simple things that you can do, whether it's getting a coffee and going to a park. We would do that too. Sometimes we would drop the boys off at their practice field, and they had a hour-long warm-up before the game started. So we'd go find a new little coffee house, and we would take a coffee and go to a park and sit and talk about whatever we needed to talk about. Or it might be that, we went and, if I had my way, walked around an antique store. If he had his way, he'd want to go to an old record store and look for smooth jazz albums because he loves smooth jazz. But letting that other person kind of maybe set the agenda for some of these little times, and not always having it be what you like to do, but kind of taking turns and learning to enjoy something that they enjoy, even if it's just a little snippet of time in the day, just something out of the ordinary, I think just really helps to break up the boredom. And you can do it even in the midst of the busyness of raising kids. Because I feel like so often, and we were guilty of this ourselves, so I'm not saying we did this perfectly at all, but you get so busy in doing the kid thing that you don't make any time for each other. And then all of a sudden the children are gone, and you look at each other and say, well, who are you? Because you've never continued to foster that relationship. So yes, it takes a lot of time to be a parent and to get to all the children's activities. Even if you limit them, we kind of limited how many things our kids could be in, but still it was busy. But don't lose yourself as a couple in the midst of doing the mom and dad role. Remember that first and foremost, you are each other's sweetheart before you're a parent.
Yeah. And there's so many conversation starters online. And so I think I love what you were saying about, ask each other questions, just like you did when you were dating. Stay current on each other. So one year for Christmas, I did 12 dates in 12 months for my husband. And it was like, I created these dates that were different every month. And I ended up creating a book out of it because it was so helpful to us. But there's conversation starters that I had for each month, and also that we can just download wherever. But those also spur conversation, so that when you do have a minute, you do catch a coffee together, you can pull some of those out and just use them.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for coming on today. What would you say as kind of your last charge to couples, your last encouragement to people who are really wanting to do things differently in 2019 with their marriage?
I think to just remember in the times in our marriage when we have to extend grace and forgiveness over and over again sometimes, just to remember how much we have been forgiven and how the Lord has met us and overlooked our faults and forgiven us when we've confessed things. And, God never, ever gives up on us. And his mercies are new every morning. We always have the chance to hit the restart button and to wipe the slate clean. And we need to extend that same grace to our spouses when we remember how much we've been forgiven. It makes it so much easier to forgive and to keep showing up.
And what would you say have been some key resources for you over the years when it comes to marriage? Do you have some books, podcasts, anything that you feel like really helped point you in the right direction?
Actually, I think even more than that is having a real life couple that has a marriage that's intact and that's healthy and that's further down the road than you. That's what I feel that I've benefited from the most. But certainly there are some books that I loved, The Marriage Builder by Larry Crabb and Sacred Marriage, also authors escaping me right now. Gary Thomas? No.
Yeah. No,
yeah, okay.
That's a Gary Thomas who Alex and I adore.
Yes. Both of those books were were fabulous. And I've very much loved them and have reread them. But I think most importantly is somebody in real life who knows you both in real life and who you can talk to when you have those bumps in the road and who will steer you toward the Lord. I think that's the most important.
That's really good. I really like that recommendation for people. And where have you found those people?
Mostly in church, but one woman I met through mom's group that I was part of. And my husband actually met one man who's kind of a mentor to him at work. So I think that what is the most important is not trying to look at different places where we can meet someone, but to just really make it a matter of prayer, to ask the Lord to bring someone along. And he's faithful. He might do it in a unexpected way, but if we really make it a matter of prayer because we know we need it, I think God will be faithful to direct you to somebody that will help you in that area.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'm going to mention one resource called Safe. There's a book called Safe People by Cloud and Townsend. And I think if people are really struggling with who is safe and who is not safe, that's a good place to kind of figure out if you just don't know, maybe you've been burned a few times and you just don't know who's safe. I would just mention that as a resource.
That sounds great too.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, Karen, as you determine, is this sin or is this just personality? If you determine this is sin that I'm dealing with in my husband's life, what next steps would you recommend to a woman?
Well, for sure, make it a matter of prayer because you're going to need it. I wouldn't recommend just going right to him and saying you're in sin. You need to stop this horrible behavior. I would recommend gently bringing up the subject in a way that is not condemning and pointing fingers, but to say, when you do this, it makes me feel this way. Put it back on your own feelings, and then maybe just very gently asking, would you be willing to pray about this, whether or not this is something in your life that you need to take care of? Like, I don't even know if I would use the word sin because it can bristle people so easily and it cause them to bristle. And then I also would always make sure that I was pointing my husband to the importance of having mentors himself. A lot of men I find don't ever want to open up to anybody. And I'm not trying to be stereotypical at all. It's just been my experience that oftentimes they don't think they need anybody else. They're an island to themselves. They're going to do what they want to do. And sure, they'll go to church. But, this kind of accountability, getting in each other's lives is just kind of for the women. And so I would make sure to again, make it a matter of prayer, but maybe bring that up, approach that subject and just say, have you ever thought about maybe getting with another man who's been married longer than we have and bouncing some things off of him? Maybe it can really help, and put it back on yourself. Say, maybe they can really help you deal with me because I know I'm difficult. you might need, help in dealing with me because I have so-and-so who helps me, but just be very cautious about it and not doing it in a condemning way, because that's just a sure way to shut them down. If you just say, hey, I've prayed about this and you are in sin and you need to stop this, I think that's going to send them the other direction.
Yeah, and maybe we need to define sin for our listeners too, because that may be a word that feels loaded and makes people bristle. When you say that, how are you defining sin?
I'm not talking about personality quirks or habits. I'm talking about things that in the Bible are outlined as behavior that is against what God desires for us. So things, like what we mentioned a little bit earlier, abuse, or things like lying or cheating, or all kinds of, my goodness, I think if you just Google what does the Bible say is sin, there'd be an infinite list, because there's so many things that we do that damage relationships, and it's all outlined in scripture. There's so many things that, that's why we need a whole lifetime to try to better our behavior, but know that we're still going to fail and God's going to meet us and forgive us and help us to go on. But any behavior that is contrary to what scripture says, that is a matter of sin. So it's not just, he loses his keys. It's more, he's cheating on his taxes or something like that. That's what I'm talking about.
An issue of personal integrity or character, or even safety for you and your children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's real anger issues, where he's getting volatile, or there's some lying and secrecy going on, or, things like that, but certainly not just little quirky things that, we all have our quirky things. We all have our little rough edges.
And I do want to mention one more resource for couples, and that is Pure Desires Ministry. That I'm going to say that again. I want to mention one more resource for couples, and that is Pure Desire Ministries. And I know there are countless couples struggling through pornography addictions and just things of that nature. And that is a great resource. And I know several couples personally who have been through just some of their programs and their husbands are sober at this point from that, and they are really moving forward in their marriages. And so I think that's really helpful for those couples who are finding themselves in that place.
Great.
Okay. Well, Karen, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate you. We absolutely love your words and think it's so important, this idea of showing up in our marriages, because ultimately that is a foundation for so much of our lives. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Happy New Year, Karen.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.